Imagine living in a beautiful home in an affluent Philadelphia neighborhood with a loving spouse, a successful career, and a beautiful one-year-old daughter. Everything seemed perfect for Stephanie Rabinowitz and her husband Craig, until one night in April 1997 when tragedy struck and a seemingly accidental death unraveled a web of lies and deceit. How well do we know the people closest to us? Let me tell you about the Rabinowitz family. They seemed like they had it all. They lived in a posh neighborhood in Philadelphia. Imagine those big houses with perfectly trimmed lawns and fancy cars parked outside. That was their world. Stephanie Rabinowitz was an incredibly smart and successful young lawyer. She didn't just go to any college, she went to Bryn Mawr and Temple Universities, both top-notch schools. She was the kind of person who had her life together, balancing a demanding career and motherhood with grace. Craig, her husband, was no less impressive on the surface. He had his own business selling latex gloves. It sounds pretty mundane, right? But apparently it was enough to keep them living comfortably. Craig was the supportive husband who worked hard to put Stephanie through school. Can you imagine the dedication that takes? Maintaining a one-income household, especially when you're supporting someone through law school, is no small feat. It seemed like he was the perfect partner, always there for her, helping her achieve her dreams. Their love story was straight out of a romance novel. They met as teenagers at summer camp, which is so adorable. They fell in love, got married, and had a beautiful daughter who was just a year old. Their little girl was the cherry on top of their picture-perfect life. Everywhere they went, they looked like the ideal family, the kind you'd see on the cover of a family magazine. It was all smiles and happiness, at least on the outside. Beneath it all, there were secrets that no one saw coming. It's shocking how someone can live a double life, and Craig was the master of it. The real story, the one that led to tragedy, is much darker and more twisted than anyone could have imagined. This idyllic life was just a facade, hiding the grim reality of Craig's deceit and betrayal. He wasn't just selling latex gloves, he was selling lies to everyone around him, and it all came crashing down most horrifically. That night, after a seemingly perfect evening out, Stephanie went upstairs for a bath while Craig stayed downstairs watching a hockey game. When Craig heard a loud thump from the bathroom, he brushed it off, thinking she had just dropped something. But when she didn't come down after 30 minutes, he went to check on her. What he found was every husband's worst nightmare. Stephanie was unconscious in the bathtub. He called 911, but it was too late. By the time paramedics arrived, Stephanie had already started turning blue. It was a scene straight out of a horror movie. The initial conclusion was that it was a tragic accident, but the coroner wasn't so sure. He found it odd that Craig mentioned Stephanie was struggling with the demands of being a mother and a lawyer, and that she occasionally took sleep aids. This raised enough suspicion for a thorough autopsy, which would eventually reveal the dark, twisted secrets Craig had been hiding. The truth was far more sinister than anyone could have ever imagined. Craig and Stephanie went out for dinner at this upscale Thai restaurant. They were one of those couples that love trying new places and enjoying good food. They had a great meal, probably shared some laughs, and then headed back home. Once they got back, Stephanie decided to take a bath. Craig, being the typical guy, settled down in front of the TV to watch a hockey game. Everything seemed normal, just like any other evening in their seemingly perfect life. Then came the first sign that something was wrong. Craig heard a loud thump from the bathroom. You'd think he'd be a bit more concerned, but he just assumed Stephanie had dropped something, maybe a shampoo bottle or something like that. He didn't think much of it and went back to the game. But after 30 minutes, when Stephanie hadn't come back downstairs, Craig finally decided to check on her. What he found was beyond horrific. Stephanie was unconscious in the bathtub, her body already starting to turn blue. Craig called 911, but by the time paramedics arrived, it was too late. Stephanie was gone. It looked like a tragic accident. Maybe she slipped and hit her head. But there was something off about the whole scene, something that just wasn't right. In the immediate aftermath, there wasn't any obvious evidence of foul play. It seemed like a tragic accident and everyone was devastated. Stephanie's family wanted to bury her quickly as per their religious customs, which required the deceased to be buried before sundown the next day. It's a tradition meant to show respect and bring closure, but this case was anything but straightforward. The coroner, Ian Hood, started to have his doubts. Something about Craig's story didn't add up. He mentioned that Stephanie had been struggling with the demands of being a mother and a lawyer, and that she sometimes took sleep aids. This raised a red flag for the coroner. Why would Craig bring that up if it was just a simple accident? Hood's suspicions grew, and he decided that a thorough autopsy was necessary despite the family's wishes for a quick burial. The decision to dig deeper turned out to be crucial. During the autopsy, they found Ambien in Stephanie's system, which was unusual. Some signs pointed to something more sinister than an accidental drowning. The coroner's insistence on a thorough investigation was about to uncover the dark and twisted secrets that Craig had been hiding, secrets that would shock everyone who thought they knew the Rabinowitz family. So in the immediate aftermath of Stephanie's death, everything pointed to a tragic accident. There was no blood, no signs of struggle, nothing that screamed foul play. It seemed like she had simply slipped into the tub and drowned. The family was devastated. As you can imagine, they wanted to bury Stephanie quickly, in line with their religious customs, which dictate that the deceased should be buried before sundown the next day. It's a way of honoring the dead and bringing a sense of closure. But then you had this coroner, Ian Hood, who wasn't buying the whole accidental death story. Craig had mentioned that Stephanie was having trouble balancing her roles as a mother and a lawyer, and that she occasionally took sleep aids. This raised Hood's suspicions. Why would Craig bring this up if it was just a simple accident? Hood decided that a thorough autopsy was necessary, despite the family's wishes for a quick burial. This decision turned out to be crucial. During the autopsy, they found Ambien in Stephanie's system. There were also signs of strangulation and bruising that didn't fit with an accidental drowning. Hood's insistence on a detailed examination was the first step in uncovering the dark secrets Craig was hiding. Stephanie's death might have been chalked up to a tragic accident, and Craig could have gotten away with murder. Now, here's where things get even more twisted. An anonymous tip came in, pointing investigators to Craig's frequent visits to a place called Delilah's Den. It turns out Craig had an obsession with a stripper named Summer, whose real name was Shannon Reinhardt. He wasn't just visiting occasionally, he was there several times a week, spending insane amounts of money. Investigators dug deeper and uncovered that Craig was in serious financial trouble. He had been running a Ponzi scheme, scamming friends and family to cover his debts. He was hemorrhaging money, and his latex glove business was just a front. The more they looked, the more they found that Craig had been living a double life. His investors, his wife, his parents, even his young daughter, they were all victims of his deceit. Craig's actions were meticulously deceptive. While everyone thought he was out making sales calls for his latex glove business, he was actually at Delilah's Den, blowing through almost $100,000 in a year. He had become completely obsessed with Summer, spending hours in private rooms, paying for lap dances, and who knows what else. Craig's addiction to his fantasy life was consuming him, and he was willing to do anything to keep it going. But that wasn't all. Craig had pawned Stephanie's heirloom jewelry shortly after her death. Trying to scrape together more money, he left a trail of financial irregularities that painted a clear picture of his desperation. The investigators found that Craig had not only been lying about his business, but also about his entire life. Craig's web of lies was starting to unravel. His friends and family who had invested in his fake business were devastated. They had trusted him completely, only to find out that he had been using them to fund his double life. Craig's actions weren't just about financial fraud, they were a deep, twisted obsession that ultimately led to murder. Craig's latex glove business was supposed to be his big moneymaker, right? But here's the thing, it was all smoke and mirrors. The business was mostly a facade. There were hardly any real estate sales happening. He had everyone fooled, his wife, his family, his investors. They all believed he was a successful businessman, diligently working to support his family, but in reality he was funneling money from a Ponzi scheme he'd set up, scamming his closest friends and relatives. But the financial deceit was just one part of the story. Craig was also a master of personal deception. He lied to everyone, his wife, his parents, his friends. Stephanie had no idea what her husband was really up to. Craig would tell her he was out making sales calls while he was actually in the dimly lit rooms of Delilah's Den. His parents, who thought the world of him, had no clue that their son was squandering his money on a stripper. Craig's web of lies extended to his closest friends who had invested their money in his bogus business. They trusted him completely, believing in the facade he had built. Can you imagine the betrayal they felt when the truth came out? It was devastating. And let's not forget the clandestine meetings with Summer. Craig wasn't just paying for dances, he was spending hours in private rooms with her, fantasizing about a life where he didn't have the responsibilities that came with his real one. To maintain this double life, Craig had to keep up a steady stream of lies. He'd tell Stephanie he was working late or out of town, all while indulging his obsessions. He even went as far as pawning Stephanie's heirloom jewelry after her death, desperately trying to gather more cash. It's sickening to think about, but it shows just how deep his deception went. Craig's actions weren't just reckless, they were calculated and cruel. He manipulated everyone around him to maintain his secret life, all the while pretending to be a loving husband and devoted father. So, what are your thoughts on this? Let us know in the comments below.